of this 4-episode series about Tutto Michelangelo, and just wait for a couple more to join. Or just wait just another minute before starting. Today will be again going back with Michelangelo to Florence, and then we'll eventually go back to Rome, this time for good, because Michelangelo at some point he didn't like Florence anymore, because Florence had changed. He didn't like what the Medici had become, and so he basically decided to leave Florence, and he would only go back there eventually in a box, because he only returned to Florence in after his death. Welcome everybody. I see some messages here. Hello. And let's wait just a few seconds so we get the chance. Everybody, welcome everybody. If you just joined, welcome to this 3rd episode of the series Tutto Michelangelo. I'll just make sure I got all my books lined up. And so today we'll start with where we have left last time. We left Michelangelo dealing with the tomb of the Pope Julius II. The della Rovere tomb actually took 40 years. So although we've seen it completed in the last episode, it will take another 4 decades for Michelangelo to complete. It was only completed in 1545, being started in 1505. So really was one of the longest projects. It was not uncommon. I would say it was rather quite common that such large projects like buildings or tombs or burials could take several decades. It wasn't unusual. Actually, most of Michelangelo projects as an architect took much longer than the time he was supposed to use for them. And something a change in the meanwhile. Soon after finishing the vault of the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo found an old friend from his childhood becoming Pope. The Cardinal of Giovanni de' Medici had become Pope with the name of Leo X. This is a portrait that Raphael had made of the Pope Leo with his 2 nephews. And here you could see the Cardinal Medici in the center. And then on the one on the left, it's the first cousin of Giovanni, Giulio di Giuliano de' Medici. So the Cardinal Giulio de' Medici was the son of Giuliano, which was Lorenzo's brother, while Giovanni was actually one of Lorenzo's children. And so he actually had fulfilled the plans that his father had ever since the Pazzi attempt to kill him, to actually take over the church, because the main sponsor of that attempt to murder them was actually Pope Sixtus IV, the Della Rovere. And Michelangelo actually got caught in this long-standing fight between these 2 families, which sounds a lot like kind of a mafia story, because there were a lot of murders, there were a lot of attempts of poisoning people. In fact, there is a book by an historian, which was written, I think, 20 or 30 years ago, called The Medici Godfathers of the Renaissance. It's here by Paul Stratton. You can find it in English. And so it's really, some of the episodes reminds a lot of this, like selling a killer to take a political enemy out. Because Michelangelo had this contract that bounded him to the Della Rovere, but on the other hand, the Pope had changed, and Pope Leo had many different plans for Michelangelo. In fact, Michelangelo was, for the next 20 years, was consistently busy with papal orders and papal commissions. The other cardinal that appears in this Raphael's painting, this painting is actually in the Uffizi Gallery. It's Luigi de' Rossi, that then was actually a maternal cousin of the Pope, and was on his mother's side. But this fact that he wanted to represent himself with his 2 cousins and cardinals, it really shows that then the family had taken over the church and would have been there for a long time. In fact, not long after the death of Leo X, then the Cardinal Giulio had become then Pope with the name of Clemens VII. So that basically nearly 3 decades that the Medici, 2.5 decades that the Medici had the power of the church. The first project that then the Cardinal wants Michelangelo to create, and here we are about so the Pope is elected in 1513, shortly after 1515, 1516. Michelangelo basically had returned to Florence in 1517 to complete the facade of the Cathedral of San Lorenzo, the Church of San Lorenzo in Florence. This church, it was rebuilt then in the Renaissance, but had been there as a Church of San Lorenzo since I think the 6th or 7th century AD. So it had been there already for 1,000 years, and of course in different forms and different shapes. It had been rebuilt at the time of Cosimo the Elder, and so this is the church where the funeral of Giovanni de' Medici, Giovanni di Bicci, was the founder of the Medici Bank and the founder of the Medici wealth and dynasty. Basically, his funeral was here, so the Medici had really a strong connection. Before Santa Reparata and then Santa Maria del Fiore churches were built, this also for about 3 centuries in the Middle Ages was the Cathedral of Florence. So it was a very relevant church with Florence. It gave a message that the Medici were rooted deeply in the history of Florence, although they didn't come originally from Florence. They came from the countryside, so they were peasants, but of course connecting with this church for them was part of their propaganda. The church had been left unfinished, so Leo X was able, first of all, to restore the power of the Medici over Florence. We know that the Medici had been, sent away at the end of the 15th century, and then again in the at the time of the descent of the French, and then eventually there would be another escape of the Medici from Florence later on in 1527. The facade, though, was very important for Leo to, of course, kind of give the message that the Medici had come back and transformed physically the city. Now, of all the arts, architecture is the one that is the most ideological one, not necessarily in a negative way, but of course it's the type of art that reflects the values of whatever is in power or whoever has enough money and power to control a city, although it might not be necessarily the ruler. And the problem that Michelangelo has at this point is that he's still bounded to the Della Rovere, but the Della Rovere are now at war against the Medici. The Pope sends his nephew Lorenzo to defeat the Della Rovere, which have the Duchy of Urbino, a beautiful town in central Italy, in the Marche region. Urbino is the city that where, by the way, Raphael was from. And in fact, the Lorenzo managed to take the city and become the only Duke of Urbino of the Medici family. It didn't bring him luck, because in fact he died shortly after at a very young age. Anyway, of this project of the facade of San Lorenzo, which of course Michelangelo never finished, actually didn't even start it, we have some projects, and we have a wooden model. I think he made 2, and this is one of them. And you can see that it's a very extremely symmetrical. The symmetry is not just the vertical; it's not just horizontal; it's also vertical. So there's a beauty in elegance, and he managed to also alternate round shape with square shape. In fact, there's kind of 2 rounds in here, and the main, the window in there. The proportions are beautiful. This is Leon Battista Alberti teachings to another level. Michelangelo kind of brings forward, elevates the language of the early Florentine Renaissance to a new language, which then we laid the base for the Mannerist architecture and for some elements of also the Baroque and Neoclassic architecture. There's some elements that will be then persistent over the centuries. Like, for example, the frames that are doubled here. You see, there's a kind of a double corner here in the frames, so that the double columns, one on top of each other, and also a certain kind of way of designing these lines and the molds of the frames and the corners in order to make them flowing in a certain way. We have also sketches of them. For this sketches, of course, of different ways and different attempts before the models were realized. The models were probably better than the drawings because they would give a visual reflection of how the building would have looked like. At the same time, and here we have Vasari that described this very well, Michelangelo had to go up to the mountains to quarry the marbles that he needed for San Lorenzo. The Medici had acquired the rights on the marble quarries of Seravezza, which is a different one from Carrara, but it's a beautiful white marble as well. It's in the similar era, but it's closer to Lucca. And then Michelangelo spent many years quarrying marble. That's what Vasari says. It is true that while he was doing this, he made wax models and other things for the facade. So it wasn't just there to quarry the marble, it was always doing more work in that sense. This is another kind of rendering of the facade, which presumably would have been decorated with statues, with bas reliefs. It would have been a lot more ornated, of course, in the wooden models, but that has also only the decoration. Anyway, this project kind of fell through, but it was not just the end. It was actually the kind of opportunity to then develop a much bigger and more important project. In fact, shortly after, in 1521, Leo X had died, and then there was an interruption of a year when they elected Hadrian VI, which was a pope that only lasted maybe over a year and 14 months, 15 months. It was a pope that actually stopped any public construction, any spending. It was the last known Italian pope until John Paul II in 1978. So for a few centuries, they didn't have a known Italian pope then because this experience wasn't very good. Anyway, eventually the new pope, Pope Clement, which was elected in 1523, had a different change of mind. And then I keep reading Vasari. Michelangelo left Rome in a hurry, and once again he was harassed by Francesco Maria, the Duke of Urbino, and the nephew of Pope Julius, who complained about Michelangelo, declaring that he had received 16,000 scudi for the tomb, and he had willingly remained in Florence. So basically, this is again this part. But eventually, when he arrived in Rome, Pope Clement, who wished to make use of him, advised Michelangelo to settle accounts with the Duke's agents. For the Pope thought that, considering what Michelangelo had done for him, he was more a creditor than a debtor. And then this continues that then Michelangelo goes with the project of the tombs of the Medici and the library attached to San Lorenzo. This is something that already was planned at the time of Leo X, because Leo X had lost his brother and Giuliano de' Medici, and also the nephew Lorenzo, which was the son of Pietro. So it was Lorenzo was basically the grandson of Lorenzo the Magnificent. They both had died relatively young. The first one, Giuliano, was the Duke of Nemours. He was appointed with this title by the King of France. So basically, was showing an alliance that the Medici had made with the crown of France. And then the other one, Lorenzo, which is the tomb is this one that we see here, had died also very young. After the conquest of Urbino, and the Medici were known at the time for having poor health. One of the main things that actually caused problem to most of them was gout. They suffered from gout. In fact, even Lorenzo the Magnificent, he died in his 40s. was 39 or 40 when he died. So also Pope Leo X died at the age of 45 or 46. So the reason for which actually he was elected in the first place was that the other cardinals during the conclave, they were convinced that would have died a few weeks or few months after being made Pope. That's why they agreed to actually make him Pope, because he was in very poor health when he entered the conclave, so they could see him dying there, although it lasted another 8 years. This is the space of the sacristy, and a space entirely designed by Michelangelo. And next door, there's the one designed by Brunelleschi and then decorated in the 17th century. This one here has inside, facing each other, the tombs on the left of Giuliano and on the right, the tomb of Lorenzo. And Michelangelo had spent, months and years in the quarries. We have a series of drawings of the blocks of marble that he had created in the quarries, including the marbles that were then used, not for the facade of San Lorenzo anymore, but for the sacristy. The sacristy, we can actually go over, and the cappelle is actually, I haven't got Google Earth up, sorry. I'm just gonna, I want to show you where these are. We go to Florence. Yeah. So San Lorenzo, it's quite, it's right here. So it's not far from the Duomo. It's where the famous market and the leather market and the food market is. So most people go there for that. And it's a very interesting complex. The complex was actually rebuilt at the time of Cosimo the Elder. It was one of the projects, sponsored. And then that's the main church inside, the facade, which is still plain, as at the time of Michelangelo, and of course the cloister. Right here, there's the library, we'll talk later on. And then at the back, there's the main dome here that has the actual tombs of the Medici. And next door, the little chapel here, the sacristy design and built by Michelangelo in the 30s. And we can enter with the video. This is the one built in the 1600s in the 17th century, which of course is Baroque, so it's a lot bigger and it has a lot of marbles and frescoes. It's a bit too much, and it reflects also certain taste and also the decadence of the Medici at that time during the 17th century. And there were about Tuscany was kind of started failing economically, but then as a result they wanted to show more than they actually had. If we go a little bit further, we have the new sacristy here, which is the space designed by Michelangelo that has the altar on one end. It's a relatively small space. It has the tombs of the two aforementioned Medici. This is the one of Lorenzo, with these allegorical giant figures, which are for Lorenzo are the dusk and the dawn, and for Giuliano are the day and the night. I've got pictures and details for them to show you. On the fourth wall, this is the wall of the altar. There is also, there are three statues which are displayed there much later, I think in 1540s or 50s, which are basically two saints and the Medici Madonna. And underneath there are the tomb of the brothers Lorenzo and Giuliano de' Medici, while the other Medici are buried in the other chapel, including Giovanni dalle Bande Nere, which I will be talking very soon. Okay, so this is the tomb of Lorenzo. First of all, yes, I want to show you, this is the big one that we saw before, space in the 3D, so we can actually, this is with people, because of course it's all usually filled with people, but you can see that the space is not huge. It's the size of the space is very interesting. It's quite an enclosed space with these windows that have, these closed windows, these paired windows. We'll talk about this more in a little bit. And So the figures reminds a lot of the figures on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, especially the sitting figures. The and then on the arcs, on these actual burials, there are laying these two nudes, a male and a female. Their characteristic is that some of them have bits of unfinished parts, which add to them some expression, some interest. In fact, also here, the edges were left unfinished, as if Michelangelo didn't really care about creating a final, extremely clean and polite statue. He wanted to show the material from which the statue came out, because I personally think it was something related with this idea of getting the this kind of eternal struggle between the brutal matter and then or the kind of rough matter, and then the perfection of the shapes, the perfections of beauty. This is the aurora, so the dawn, and then there is the dusk here, which as well has the head, the portrait, the face unfinished, and this position looks quite uncomfortable. It's quite strange, and again, it's quite a unique position of the man. You could see here, you could see the chisel and the face being left unfinished, but even though it's only kind of started, it looks completely coherent and completely understandable in this context. It doesn't look like, oh, he hasn't finished it, although he didn't. The reason also for leaving them unfinished is that Michelangelo was caught into the wars of Italy with the events between 1527 and 1530 that really changed completely Florence. Here is what I mentioned before. On the figure sitting, who looks more as a philosopher, in Florence they call it il pensoso, the one who's thinking. It's the young Lorenzo and the Duke of Urbino, and then this is the prophet Isaiah from the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. You can see that the position is very similar, and there are some similarities in how he moves the arms, and so of course certain solution of how Michelangelo wanted to see the body in 3D had been used here in a great way. Of course, the helmet and the arms are very beautifully decorated with this kind of animals, as the lion's head here on the top. The lions was one of the symbols of the Medici, so that's why this one here on the top. This helmet actually has a kind of a lion mouth here on the top. This is actually a portrait. This is by Raphael of the actual Duke of Urbino. So he kind of looked kind of different in the statue. And that's another thing that Michelangelo, he creates this figure of an idealized figure. This could be the David that we saw. It looks very similar to kind of an idealized portrait. It didn't match the physical resemblance of Lorenzo de' Medici. It didn't actually match the Duke of Urbino. And this is the tomb again. On the opposite facade, there's Giuliano, which was the uncle of Lorenzo and was one of Lorenzo's Magnifico's brothers, so was actually the Pope's brother, and was one of Lorenzo Magnifico's children, so was one of the Pope's brothers. And he is represented as a kind of classical, like a Roman general, like a classical hero, which is heavily sculptured breastplate with the kind of outfit of a Roman general, and also kind of the resemblance of a Roman statue. And here there are the figures of the night and the day. The night is the lady and the day is the other one. Well, the night has a particular awkward breasts, which are kind of going in a very strange position, and so there's a lot of speculation that's been made if Michelangelo had used a model, or if something that Michelangelo actually didn't really want to do in a specific way. That's been a lot of speculation about that. And then there's the day, which actually has the face completely unfinished, even more than the dusk that we saw before. So that's again another element. figure of the day reminds a lot of the Roman statues of rivers, or like, you know, laying figures, which usually were allegories or of rivers. This is another one. You can see that also the whiteness of the marble. Marble is really beautiful. And in black and white, you can probably appreciate it more. One of the theories about the breasts of the day, which are, you know, they look very realistic, but the other end that they go in different direction, they are slightly different shapes. It's because maybe he used a model of a woman with the breast cancer, which probably was quite common back then, and of course was not treated or wasn't even acknowledged. Anyway, these statues, they really became another great success of Michelangelo. Michelangelo got praised a lot for this work. It took him about a decade to make this chapel, and there were some poems which basically Vasari describes. He actually included them in his account of these of the chapel, and it is, and there's this poetry written by Giovanni Strozzi, which was written to honor these figures. La notte che tu vedi in sì dolci atti dormire fu da un angelo scolpita in questo sasso, e perché dorme a vita. Destala se non credi e parlerati. Night, whom you see sleeping in such a sweet attitude, was carved in stone by an angel, so referring to Michelangelo. And although she sleeps, she has life. Wake her if you don't believe it, and she will speak to you. And this is part of that kind of myth of Michelangelo creating life figures, creating figures that are really alive, like the Moses. So that's something that really Vasari cares a lot about and wants us to understand how powerful was this representation, and they are. Years later, Michelangelo replied. He wrote some verses himself to reply to this compliment. Caro me il sonno è più l'esser di sasso, mentre che il danno e la vergogna dura. Non veder, non sentirmi è gran ventura, però non mi destar, te parla basso. My sleep is dear to me, and more dear this being of stone, as long as the agony and shame last. This reflects the fact that Michelangelo was a fugitive for some time, and then even in Rome, although he was busy, he worked, he had honors, he was given a pension by the Pope, he had everything he ever wanted. He was still an exile. At that time, Florence and Rome were separate countries. Tuscany was a separate country. There was a different language. There were many differences, and so of course he felt he kind of a force into exile. Although he was invited several times to go back to Florence, he never went. He always refused to go. And so not to see, not to hear or feel is for me the best fortune. So do not wake me up. Speak softly. So Michelangelo here said, I wish I was made of stone. So don't wake up this statue, because in there's somebody who's sleeping that doesn't want to see what the world has become now. This is part of the frieze. Even in the details, in the decorative details, Michelangelo creates a beautiful setting. Look at this skull, and then the rope and the shell. Everything is made in such a fine way. Of course, this is the lesson of the ancient Roman decorations and bas-reliefs being updated, though, because Michelangelo doesn't really copy the ancient art. He creates a new art which can inspire after that. And then the Medici Madonna as well was left unfinished, and another Madonna, unconventional Madonna by Michelangelo, although this was left probably in his workshop in Florence and was only moved here in the 1540s or 1550s, so much later. The chapel as well was completed a little later. And here you can see the Virgin Mary, which is in a very, looks like in a very uncomfortable position. It's like she's kind of standing, about to stand up or just sat. So there is some movement there. And then the child going for the breast, because of course that's what children do a lot half of the time when they are in the mothers. And so you could see this torsion. This is again another way that Michelangelo put into action this kind of these two figures which were extremely canonical and classical, but Michelangelo every time creates a new version, a new way to bring them to life, basically. And as Vasari also has told us, in this years, Michelangelo made many wax and many kind of plaster or many kind of other parts of figures. This is very similar to one of the figures. So probably, we're not sure if it's a Michelangelo, but it's definitely very close to Michelangelo's style, this bozzetto. The other project that he did then for the Medici was the Biblioteca Laurenziana. This is one of the most important and oldest library in the world. It was created by the Medici, and it features tens of thousands of manuscripts, hundreds of thousands of books, and it's still a working library. It's a state-owned library where it still acquires to this day new books. And the reading room as well as the entrance were designed by Michelangelo. In this desk they would have had a number of manuscripts with a little kind of list of the books on each side, on each door, on each one of these little tablets hanging here from the sides. And then there would have been this would have been open to the city. To me, because the space was quite narrow and quite limited, because they had to be built in the grounds of the convents. It's basically between the two cloisters. And he had to create also an entrance, which is a very, very innovative, very unusual way. The staircase actually divided in two, three ones. There's also like a very strong symbology, but also a very strong psychological effect on us. Let's watch first a short video. This is a video that has been made by the library. Now, the entrance to the library is right, looking at the churches on the left side. It is open to the public, although it's still a working library, so they don't really want tours inside, but there are times where you can actually visit it. This is the cloisters, which are beautiful. Michelangelo designed, he didn't finish to build it. It actually managed to he didn't manage to finish it, but actually all the designs of his, and he started building it. Here you see there's 11,000 manuscripts, 2,500 papyruses. Like, these are ancient papyruses with like poetry and other, fragments of ancient literature. For a long time, I believe they belong to be lost. And 126,000 books, printed books. This is the director of the library, and this is a project Michelangelo made in 1520s and during the time of the papacy of Pope Clement VII. So here we have the inside of the library. This is called Ricetto. Basically, is the entrance, which was a very limited space. Michelangelo managed to create this beautiful architecture, and then a staircase, a grand staircase, which actually fills half of the room, leading to the ground hall over there, where we have the beautiful carved ceiling. And then this is the flooring here. The flooring is like this because that's the original flooring, I believe.
But
on the side, these are runners. So basically, these are rugs. How do you call it? So there's still the floor. There's still the floor underneath, I believe. But these are runners. This is because this is where people walk in, out, and on, and so probably this was damaged, and so for preservation reason they keep it like that. Yeah. So it's basically. I'm not sure how it is now. I haven't been there maybe in 15 years, so I'm not sure how the floor is. The floor is still there. It's just these are runners that I put on, just to protect the tiles and the flooring, which is a beautiful design as well. And so we don't need this. These are some of the objects that they have there. So this is the chain of the books. The manuscripts actually left all the time on those desks, and so people could read on this little tablets hanging. There's the list of the books that were on that desk, so you could go to the desk and open there. So you didn't have to store them, get them, and they were just there. Many of them were like books that would be, quite in demand, like Dante, Divine Comedy, and treatise of the, of the 16th, 17th century or Middle Age classic books. This is Boccaccio Decameron. I can read this is Trionfi, and then this Dante Alighieri Divine Comedy. So they're books that actually, and this little boards is still there. Michelangelo didn't actually finish to build it, although the project was finished, because Clement VII summoned him in Rome in in 1533, 1534, and that's when Michelangelo actually decided to move for good to Rome, as we will see. These are some of the manuscripts that they're showing. Among them, there are some. This is a papyrus. The Greek poets Callimachus, this Greek writings, is it, from the ancient times, the fragments dating back to the Greek or Roman times. And then here, this is the Medici Bible. This was actually created for one of Lorenzo's Magnifico's daughter's marriage. She actually died before she married as a teenager. And Lorenzo had this beautiful manuscript being made. It's a praying book with this beautiful velvet and gems, and this is an amazing book. It's not kind of books that they make anymore. Imagine that when this was made, that book would have cost as much as buying a 3-story building in central Florence at the time. So, and so this is the staircase. Staircase is actually, two smaller side ones and this grand oval thing. It's really a kind of a temple to culture. It's also a kind of homage to the importance of the books and this important library. But the space is quite claustrophobic. In fact, and I don't know if you recognize, this is a Russian-born artist, one of the main artists of the 20th century, Mart Rothko. I think it was Rochkovich, his name, and then he emigrated as a child with his father from. Was born under the Russian Empire, and then during the communist Russia, he actually left and moved to the US, when he became one of the most important artists of what is known as American action painting, or American abstract expressionism, which is basically the art of Jackson Pollock, Mart Rothko, and a few others. And Rothko actually was at some point in his career, I believe in 1958 or 9, it was asked by the Miles van der Rohe, the architect, who was building the Seagram building, this huge skyscraper in New York City, to create a series of paintings, I believe 9 or 10, to decorate the restaurant, which was the Four Seasons restaurant, which was going to be the greatest restaurant at that time, where rich people wanted to go out and hang out in New York. Of course, Mart Rothko despised the wealthy and rich and all the people, but he eventually originally accepted the commission, but then eventually he refused to give the artworks to the restaurant. Imagine that in that building and in the restaurant already there were Picasso's and a few other paintings of famous painters. So it would have been for him a boost of his career. Anyway, during the time when he was painting these paintings, he eventually made a series of 30 of them, of which I'm not sure if all of them or some of them are in London in the Tate Modern. They were gifted to, I think 10 or 15 of them were gifted to the Tate Modern. I've seen some of them in a temporary exhibition in Rome 20 years ago. They're just these kind of squares with rectangles of different tones of colors, but they're quite claustrophobic in the result. And Mart Rothko affirmed at some point that when he visited Italy several times, and of course he knew the library, he knew Michelangelo's designs, and he realized, and in a letter he writes that the more I was painting these artworks, I realized how I was thinking about the Michelangelo's library, and the idea that he had found in the library, if I can find, yes, it was that it was kind of a extremely claustrophobic space. When you enter, you have the impression that there's no way out except the staircase and the door, but it's something that at first you don't see because you are down here, and so it looks like there's no exit, but then you have to go up as if kind of a sort of dynamic similar to the Dante's Inferno. You are in the closed space of your own, you're trapped in your own body, in your own world, and then you have to ascend, you have to kind of elevate yourself somehow. So there's also kind of sort of symbolism, which I think as an artist he really felt, and you can see that this beautiful harmony. It's also kind of claustrophobic because there's deep windows, and these are called inginocchiate, finestre inginocchiate or colonne inginocchiate, this kind of knees down here, looks like somebody on his knees. They also kind of boxed up this space. Anyway, Rothko eventually killed himself. He had, probably this was the consequence of a divorce or other kind of problems that he had anyway. But it's really interesting that you have this connection, that Michelangelo is one of the few artists of the classical times that was able to actually connect, after centuries. He can still connect and talk to contemporary artists, abstract artists. This is also a proof that art doesn't have to be figurative. This element, the concept of art goes beyond what the figures represent. This portrait here was made by Sebastiano Piombo. It's a portrait of Pope Clement VII. So in the meanwhile, Pope Leo had died, and Pope Clement had an even bigger project for Michelangelo. He was the cousin of the previous Pope, and he was, of course, the son of the murdered brother of Lorenzo, so Di Giuliano. So his name was Giulio Di Giuliano. And Clemens was the one who ultimately asked Michelangelo to come back to Rome and to do the Last Judgment that we will see at the end of this talk. And but things weren't always good with him, because the Medici, the Pope Clemens was caught in one of the most dramatic events of the 1500s. In fact, he sided with France against the empire, against Charles V of Habsburg. So the emperor sent his German troops, and there were Spaniards and Germans and also Italian mercenaries who came down towards Rome and basically attack and siege Rome for 1 year. Even the Pope was taken prisoner and was only left at the cost of a big ransom. Eventually, the Pope and the Emperor made peace. The Pope agreed to incoronate the Emperor in Bologna, and also the fine was sensibly reduced. And but the effect of the sack of Rome, which basically killed a third of the population of Rome, and also gave the message that the Pope was just another king, it was a figure above the others, had the consequences of that will last for all the century, and eventually led to slow but inevitable decadence of Rome and Italy in general, at the or the other European powers to gain more power and importance. One of the effects of the sack of Rome was that the Florentines exiled the Medici again, because of course the Pope was defeated and prisoner. The Medici had no power anymore, and so the ruler of Florence at the time, Alessandro de' Medici. Alessandro was an illegitimate son of Piero de' Medici, and it was actually known as Alessandro il Moro. And he was exiled from Florence, and the Florentine built barricades and fortified the city to resist in 1528 to 29, 30 to the return of the city. They fought this, they managed to resist almost a year, for 10 months, to the return of the Medici, to the return of Alessandro. Amongst those who fought for the Republic, there was Michelangelo. And this drawing of a fort, of a fortification, was actually one of the projects that Michelangelo made to, there's another one here. You can see the sketches for figures and stuff. And then this is a gate. These walls, they were meant to withstand not just an attack of soldiers, but cannonballs. Because of course, at that time, there was a change. Gunpowder was known in the West since the 1300s, and cannons and guns were around the 1380, 1370. They were already in use, but they didn't really had much power until the beginning of 1500s. That's when they started to become very important. And so Michelangelo also built walls and fortification that can withstand cannonballs. So it was also a very skilled architect. He also figured out a way to put the bricks in a way that the wall was much stronger and sturdier. And but nonetheless, and that there was an episode which is very important, which is connected with Michelangelo's life, but I think it has a much more important meaning in the history, and it's the killing of the wounding of Giovanni dalle Bande Nere, John with the black flag. And Giovanni was a cousin of the Medici. It was a descendant of Pier Francesco de' Medici, so the kind of the poor side of the Medici, same one of Lorenzo, Pier Francesco, and so on. And he actually had married a Salviati, which was a descendant of the Medici from the main branch, and he was the father of Cosimo de' Medici, who became then the Grand Duchy of Florence. So the ruling family for the next 200 years of Florence were actually his descendants. And Giovanni was an extremely talented warrior, who was one of the last great captains of the Italian Renaissance, and he was the last who used heavy infantry, because then the Germans were using cannons. And this is a movie called Il Mestiere delle Armi by Ermanno Olmi, one of the greatest Italian directors. It's a beautiful, extremely well-made movie, very slow. It could be boring to death, but it's very well made. And it's also, there's this scene when he's got his legs amputated, which lasts for half an hour, and you can see every single detail of that. This was made 20 or 25 years ago. And this is the moment of the battle, the last charge. This is Giovanni dalle Bande Nere. This is the General von Fürstenberg, which was one of the commanders of the Lanzi, the German mercenaries, which then the year after would have arrived in Rome and destroyed. This is near Mantua, and according to Vasari and many other historians, only Giovanni could have stopped the troops, the imperial troops. But as you will see now, he was taken by surprise, and the cannon actually took his leg off, and he eventually died painfully. Giovanni was then later on buried in Mantua, and only about 200 years later was then translated, and now he rests in the Medici Chapel as well. Not the one with Michelangelo, but the main one. It's buried there. His body has also been checked. It's done very well. Actually, the burial armor of Giovanni de' Medici is kept in the Siebert Museum in Florence, so you can actually see also that one. So this is the moment of the charge. This was the battle in Mantua was in 1526, and so this at the Florentines charging was the Pope who actually appointed him. He had turned his standards, his flags black after the Pope Medici Leo X had died. And that's what his name. And then that's a cannon, which was something that they didn't expect it, although cannons were, but these are much more modern, much more powerful at a wider range. And then he ordered the retreat, and on his way back, he was actually caught in the leg, and that's what the end. This was considered the end of the age, because then, of course, the Pope could not offer any more resistance, and then the Germans arrived in Rome, and that happened, the Sacred Rome. This is Alessandro il Moro. Because he was dark skin, he had curly hair, he was believed to be, and it wasn't a legitimate son, but they didn't know with whom. If it was actually the actual son of the Pope, could have been the son of Giulio, which was then particularly dear to the Pope, and then the Pope reinstated him with the army. As a result of that, and Alessandro becoming again the Lord of Florence, there was really, this is his coat of arms, and with the motto in this is in Spanish, non vuelvo sin vencer, I don't come back without winning. So it's like a winner kind of thing. And basically Alessandro ruled really as a tyrant. He stripped off all the Republican kind of symbols, stripped off power, all the Republican system. So basically it was really, and that was persecuting those who had fought. Michelangelo had to hide for at least a month in the basement of the sacristy. I'll show you some pictures now. But in 1537, Alessandro got murdered by his cousin, Lorenzaccio de' Medici, or Lorenzino de' Medici, but then the Florentines started calling him Lorenzaccio, which was a poet, and he was also a patriot, and he believed that tyrants should be killed. That, you know, it's not a crime to kill tyrants because, you know, you give freedom. And, you know, anyway, Lorenzaccio then escaped from Florence, and about a decade later, he was killed by an assassin paid for Cosimo de' Medici, who meant to avenge whoever had killed the man of power. It's really like a mafia kind of style. This man, by then, was in Venice, and when he left we had like a lover in Venice, and when he left this woman's house, somebody just stabbed him in the street. And then eventually, eventually the power was given to the 18 years old Cosimo de' Medici, which was Cosimo di Francesco, so was from the poor kind of lineage, so not from the main lineage like Alessandro. And Alessandro had no children, or had illegitimate children, but they were too young, and there was no chance to you know, kind of give this power to a 3 years old in that situation where the Republicans want to take back the power. But Cosimo eventually ruled as a tyrant as well, although generally he improved and modernized the state. He was also vastly responsible for the flourishing of art in the second half of the 16th century, Mannerism, Florentine art, especially he was a main sponsor of Vasari and Bronzino. This portrait, in fact, is the portrait of Cosimo I, made by Bronzino. So we'll mention more of Bronzino and the second half of 16th century Florentine art later on in the next episode. In 1973, while doing refurbishment of the floor and the sewage system underneath the chapel of the Sagrestia Nuova in San Lorenzo, the one with the Medici tombs, they found this room, which now is open to the public. They reopened it 4 or 5 years ago. And basically, this was a place where they believe Michelangelo had to hide for 1 or 2 months after the return of Alessandro de' Medici, which of course wanted his head, because Michelangelo had worked for the Medici, and then he had betrayed them by siding and working fortifying Florence against the return of the Medici. So they believed that they had somebody bring him in food, and he was there. And then there's a number of drawings, sketches made by Michelangelo down there in the crypt. So this was found in 1973 and only reopened 4 or 5 years ago. It was just a couple of years before COVID. So I'm not sure what's the arrangements now to see it. I think you need to pre-book. I don't know how it really works, but well, the tombs, they're open as a museum, so you can go at any time. And it's very interesting. Imagine he would spend there months. Then Michelangelo basically also lost his father in 1534. He had no reason to stay in Florence, so he decided to move to Rome. At the same time, Pope Clemens VII, after regaining power, wanted him to do more work for him, and especially to complete a great project that probably he had in mind for quite some time, which was to complete the decoration of the Sistine Chapel, or better to update and, you know, to change the main outer wall of the Sistine Chapel, which had possibly could have had some damage, but also they wanted more to reflect the ceiling and the new kind of course. In the meanwhile, Michelangelo also worked he was very close to the community of the Florentine expert, because with the return of Alessandro de' Medici, which I didn't finish to say, he was the legitimate son of either the Pope or either Piero, with the servant. Can't remember her name. She was from nearby Lazio region, nearby Sabina, and she was probably black. She was a Moor, and in fact, Alessandro was called Moro. It could have just been kind of a particular dark skin tone. We're not really sure because there's lack of documents. Anyway, this woman has left a couple of letters, and so we have some documentation, although we're not sure who was exactly who she was, what she did, and all that. Anyway, she was close to the family because, of course, she had given the birth to a Medici. And this figure here, it's known the Apollo David, and this was sculptured in 1530, so right, at the time after the fall of Florence, for Baccio Valori. Baccio Valori was actually the papal kind of administrator that was sent to Florence. So this it was left unfinished as well, but it's a beautiful statue of a figure which is usually called an Apollo. I think it's in the Bargello now, but it cannot be, of course, defined. For a long time was also called the David. It has this beautiful nude figure, again, very reminds us a lot of the prigioni, of the prisoners for the tomb of Giulio II, with this kind of unfinished background and the unfinished parts. Another statue which we're not 100% sure it was, it looks quite modern in the concept and everything, which has been attributed to Michelangelo, is this crouching figure, which is currently in the Hermitage. It entered the collection of the Tsar in the 19th century at some point, which could have been made in the same period. We don't know for what, but it's got some elements very close to the Medici tomb style. So we're not 100% sure he's Michelangelo, but it's a very nice statue anyway, so I thought I'll show you. While in Rome then, later on in the late 1530s, he worked for this Donato Giannotto, which was a Florentine expert that had, with whom he shared probably the fact that they thought that Florence should have been a republic and not a grand duchy, which basically was like a kingdom where, with a family ruling, and Cosimo had changed the structure of the country. So basically he had all the power in his hands, and he destroyed Siena, for example. The city was spared, but then the Republic of Siena was completely dismembered. Siena became basically a possession of Florence. So for this man, Michelangelo sculptured this Brutus, which is again an homage to the this Republican figure of Republican Rome. So again, taking inspiration from ancient Rome history and culture to praise the values of the republicanism versus dictatorship and tyranny. So it's again, it was quite uncommon for Michelangelo's age. Artists usually, they work for the powerful and the rich. Whatever was in power, they would work for them. They would never question power because they were artists doing art. They were not doing politics. Michelangelo actually was actively involved in politics and was actually his art is infused with moral ideas, with religious ideas. So that's also what makes Michelangelo extremely modern, because we had to wait the late 18th century to see artists which had that kind of political passion, which is one of the reasons why also they praise him again over and over again. And back in Rome, he was able to work closely and be closer to an old friend who he met in 1511 while he was finishing the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. His name was Sebastiano Luciani, better known as Sebastiano del Piombo. Now, the paintings and the drawings I'm going to show you, they were made between 1512, 13 and the 1530s, so they span about 20 years. They have a friendship which lasted longer than 20 years. Of course, Michelangelo was giving a number of sketches and inspiration to Sebastiano. This is a promo for the exhibition that took place in London 6 or 7 years ago, Michelangelo and Sebastiano. I've got the catalog here. It was a very nice exhibition, and he showed some incredible paintings and the matching with the drawings, the ideas that Michelangelo had provided to Sebastiano. We also have letters and correspondence. There was also the statue of the Raising Christ on the exhibition. So you could see here the paintings are by Sebastiano, the drawings are by Michelangelo. You can perfectly overlap them. So Sebastiano actually copied the sketches that Michelangelo studied in 2017. I got the images now to show you so we can actually see them. Sebastiano was called Del Piombo, the lead, because he was appointed by Pope Julius as the seal bearer of the Pope. So basically, he was the one who went around with the Pope and met the Pope daily. He had this. He made the seals, the lead seals, in to the official documents of the Pope, because you need some skills in artistry. Although kind of Sebastiano didn't really like the job. The job came with a lot of perks, being very close to the Pope, so one of the most powerful men in the time, and then having a secure income, very prestigious, and then being in touch and in contact with all the artists that were around there. So actually was also an advisor in the artistic matter for the Pope. And Michelangelo somehow also used him. For example, this painting here is the Raising of Lazarus, and this was made for the Cardinal Giulio de' Medici, which at the time was the Bishop of Nemours in France. And he had to, I'm sorry, the Bishop of Narbonne in France. And he ordered two paintings, the Transfiguration of Christ to Raphael, and then this one to Sebastiano. And probably Michelangelo kind of transformed this kind of painting into a sort of challenger to Raphael's art. In fact, Raphael didn't finish the painting, and the painting was never sent to France. It's still in the Vatican, while this one went to France and eventually was sold and landed in London. This is the first painting that was bought by the National Gallery in the 19th century when it was established, and currently is in London. And you could see the figures, especially the figure of Lazarus here with this kind of a head cloth and the leg. It's really Michelangelo-esque, and this is the drawing by Michelangelo, so you can actually see that this is the kind of blueprints that Michelangelo provided to his friend Sebastiano to tell him. Sebastiano was a Venetian, and of course the color, the quality of the color, a certain way of representing the figure, it is very much like the Venetian art of like Bellini or Giorgione. I believe that Sebastiano had studied with one of them. And then here, look at the finger here. It's the same finger of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. So you can actually, this was made 6, 7, 8 years after the ceiling. So you can actually see that there are a number of elements that are here. So although this wasn't physically painted by Michelangelo, it could be well considered a painting by Michelangelo. If Michelangelo had the time and the will to paint something like this, he would have done it this way or very close to this one. The other figures here, then you can see the sketches here. Another famous painting I mentioned during the tour of Viterbo that I did a few months back, and it's is this beautiful Pietà, which is in Viterbo, this town outside of Rome, and with the Pietà, very different than the one of the Vatican, where the Christ is laying on the floor, and then the Virgin is right here in the center. And you can see that the bust of the Virgin actually looks like a man rather than. And the fingers and all these details, these are all trials by Michelangelo. And then you can see that Sebastiano used them to create this figure. It's very massive Madonna here. It's a beautiful painting that has like kind of a Venetian or northern kind of background. This is not a background that you find in any of Tuscany painting. Michelangelo would have not done that background. So it's actually, this is a merging between Tuscan art, Michelangelo's style, and Venetian art with this beautiful background here. Another, this is a part of a triptych, again with Christ going down to the limbo, and there's also a chapel in the Church of San Pietro in Montorio that was with a beautiful flagellation, crucifixion, which was painted with the collaboration between Sebastiano and Michelangelo, because between 1517 and 1530 something, 33 or 34, Michelangelo, so for 17 years Michelangelo was in Florence. Basically, he kind of traveled sometimes, but he was based in Florence in those years. Traveled to see the Pope Medici, traveled, but he spent time mostly in Florence and the quarries as well. He spent a few years up there. There's a lot of letters that they wrote each other, so we have a lot of information between the letters between Sebastiano and Michelangelo. There's one that I find quite amusing. Some of the letters were on the exhibition. And so here, for example, you could see that's some of the letters by Sebastiano and some letters by Michelangelo, which of course he kept. So I actually see the original. And there's one which is very incredible, really, really makes also, and this is the one Thursday, 12th April 1520. Sebastiano to Michelangelo, which is in Florence. My dearest compare, I believe you have heard that poor Raphael of Urbino has died, something which I think you must be very sorry about. Of course, he knew that Michelangelo was quite happy that Raphael had passed away. May God forgive him. Now I should briefly inform you that the Sala dei Pontefici, which is the room, one of Raphael's room, the room of Constantine, which just had been started then, needs to be painted. Something that Raphael's workshop assistants keep boasting about, and they want to paint it with oils. So with oil painting, not with canvases. There is one, not with tempera, water base or egg tempera. There is a figure which probably was painted by Raphael himself, which was made of oil, in oil painting, and it's the Allegory of Justice inside the room, which has been recently restored. I beg you to remember me in this case and to recommend me to the most Reverend Monsignor Cardinal Giulio de' Medici. And if I'm in any good at this type of work, please let me carry it out, because I will not bring you shame, as I believe I have not shamed you until now. And this is after nearly a decade that they've been working together and made some beautiful paintings, which some we've seen, because the Raising of Lazarus was finished in 18 or 19. I bought my painting, The Raising of Lazarus, again to the Vatican Palace with the painting Raphael made, the Transfiguration, and he was not ashamed of it, and I was not ashamed of it. And above all, you should watch out, because Raphael of Urbino's assistant is coming to Florence so as to get all the jobs in the Vatican Palace for the Most Reverend Monsignore. Please make sure that I'm given at least one of these jobs. So basically, he's asking for a recommendation because he knows Michelangelo is close to the Medici. Of course, Michelangelo didn't intervene, and of the pupils of Raphael, Giulio Romano, Francesco Penna, and the others basically completed the room. In the same moment where Michelangelo moved from Florence to Rome, he started publishing also some of his poems, and he's written about 400 components, sonnets, mostly sonnets, but also stanzas and other short components, not long poetry, but like showing poetry, mostly like with this is some of the editions of them. Most of them are love sonnets. Many of them are dedicated to one man, Tommaso Cavalieri, which he made no mystery that I had a very strong passion, as we will see. This is one of the, I believe this is the 114, didn't write it down. Amor mi prende e la beltà mi lega, la pietà, la mercè col dolci sguardi, forma speranza al cor, par che ne doni. And so part of the decision to kind of move to Rome was also because he met this 22, 23 years old young nobleman, very gentle, very beautiful, and he actually had the passion for him. Michelangelo at that point was in his mid-50s, but had really his early 50s, mid-50s, which, you know, he actually started correspondence with him, a very formal correspondence. We have the letters, and started to gift him a number of artworks, including this one. This is a beautiful portrait known as Cleopatra, because it's a snake around her body, and it's a beautiful, beautiful drawing. This one is really incredible. This was sent as a gift, and we know in some letters they sent him gifts and say, if you don't like, I'll make another one. It was very, like, I believe one of the, I'm not sure if this one or one of these are gifts that he sent to this man Tommaso Cavalieri. And I've got a few more poems here to read to you. I read them in Italian and then translate them. Many mention, of course, God. So there are several. This is a 1920s edition, but you could see many of them at Tommaso de Cavalieri. So it's just sento d'un fuoco un freddo aspetto acceso che lontan m'arde e seco agghiaccia. Provo una forza in due leggiadre braccia che muove senza moto ogni altro peso. I feel a fire and a cold field that burns. So it's, of course, it's a and then it burns from afar, and then it gives me chills. This kind of hot and cold kind of feelings that love gives. Another one, veggio. This is the sonnet 109. Veggio coi bei vostri occhi un dolce lume che come ai ciechi già veder non posso. I see with your beautiful eyes a sweet light that I can't see anymore with my blind eyes. And this porto coi vostri piedi un pondo addosso che dei miei zoppi non è il loro costume. I bring with your feet a heavy weight which with my crippled feet and with my crippled legs I cannot do anymore. It's like I see in your youth something that gives me strength. That's the message here. But there's even some that are even that have really something extraordinary, I believe. Ben può talor col mio ridente desio salir la speme a non esser fallace, che se ogni nostro affetto al ciel dispiace, a che fin fatto avrebbe il mondo e Dio? How can this burning desire increase my hope and not be mistaken? Because how can our feelings be unpleasant for God? How would have God be created the world to which purpose? Like, how can this love that I have for another man be something against God, as the church was teaching and partially still teaching now, although this Pope is a bit more open in that sense. I think last week or 2 weeks ago said something very open to, homosexuality, which is something that, I think it's a big change. But this Michelangelo in the 1513 saying, how can this feeling that I have not be something that comes from God? So it's really something basically that Pope Francesco said 2 weeks ago, like that love comes from God, and so there cannot be love cannot be wrong. And so it's also something that you find in Dante Alighieri. Dante Alighieri in the fifth canto of the Inferno, Paolo e Francesca. Amor cannullo amato, amar perdona. Love that doesn't forgive any lover. If you love someone, you cannot be loved back, because it's true love. Although it may sound as a bit of a stalker agenda, I'm not sure. But in Dante Alighieri, there's this concept that if love is true, it cannot be wrong. And so Michelangelo actually uses that. Now, we don't know. There's a lot of speculation about that. We don't really know what kind of relationship they had. That Michelangelo had a physical love, a passion for this guy, and that he knew about that. It's certain. We don't know what the relationship they had. Tommaso Gabriele later on married and also had children. Actually, he had some financial problems where I think one of his children died, leaving small grandchildren. So he actually had also some problems later on in life. Anyway, for the last 30 years of the life of Michelangelo, Tommaso Cavalieri was close to him, and so was also in charge of the dealing with the aftermath of the death of Michelangelo. So it was really an important figure for him. And whatever, if they actually had a physical relationship or if it was only platonic, like as you say, just ideal, this is something we don't know. But the sonnets make quite clear that actually he had a physical passion for him. It wasn't just an intellectual kind of thing. And so this is the time where there's a lot of mythological and very physical bodies. In this case, you could see that there's also related, if you read that, if you see these drawings closer to the poems, and then you can understand that that's the passion that Michelangelo had. And then you could see this is, for example, this kind of genius, inspiring beauty, and there's all these figures that grow around and the stories. This beautiful allegory of artistic inspiration, which somehow rules on the world. that's kind of sphere represent the world, and then there's this box with masks, which are stories basically, isn't it? This is Ganymedes, which was again a boy loved by Zeus that was kidnapped, a very well-known story from the Metamorphosis. And this is the fall of Phaeton, because again there's a race, but there's also the fall, the man who wanted to be too close to the sun and then eventually fell down. And so here again, there's a story of raise and fall. This drawing is really beautiful. This is again another the image of the same subject here. This is the colored version of it. I mean, it's the same one. It's just a darker picture. That's again, this is a punishment of Prometheus or Titanus. I'm not sure. But anyway, again, we have this big eagle which represents Zeus. We could actually kind of see also in this representation, especially the eagle with the young boy, some sort of kind of desire that Michelangelo also had for this man. So I think in this case it's quite appropriate to see kind of a more personal and physical reading of that. This is actually a later painting. This is not by Michelangelo, but it's believed to be inspired after Michelangelo. It could be a conception of Michelangelo as a result of like ideas and kind of solutions that were circulating at that time and inspired Michelangelo. That's another crucifixion here. And there's the Pietà, known as the Pietà for Vittoria Colonna, both of them probably. This is the crucifixion. And Vittoria Colonna is another very important figure in Michelangelo's life at this time. Michelangelo had become increasingly critical of the church, not just because of the Medici, but in general, what was the reaction of the church. Now, as the result of the sack of Rome and Lutheranism, the church had acknowledged the fact that they needed reformation, they needed change, which was something that Martin Luther urged the church, although in a revolutionary way, by saying we don't need the church. The core concept of Protestantism is like anyone as a son of God can be a priest, and we don't need an organized church. We only need pastors that can actually study and comment, but then everybody is free to read the Bible and kind of comment and relate straight to God. We don't need forgiveness from a priest. We don't need rituals. We don't need anything. And so, in fact, the Protestant Lutheran churches are very plain, and there's just preaching. There's no kind of Eucharist or stuff like that. Within the church, many people agreed with the content of what Luther said, not with the extreme reaction, but they understood that there was a need for reformation. There was a preacher called Juan de Valdez who preached in Naples at the time, was very influential in Italy at the time, and a movement called the Spirituali, who believed that the authority of the church was secondary to the inspiration of the Holy Ghost. And that's why the spirito means spirit, ghost. And so that was how God acts in our lives. So if you have faith, then God will show you the way, which is similar to like many Baptist churches or many Pentecostal churches. They have the same kind of idea, basically, that if you're a good person and you believe, then you will be given answers. And Michelangelo was part of that group, and Vittoria Colonna also was part of that group. And this is a portrait of Vittoria Colonna, and she died also relatively young, so also that was another big loss for Michelangelo. They were very close. In the 19th century, when homosexuality was washed from any of the life of Michelangelo, many biography don't even mention that, and so there was also somehow that they made you think that actually they had a relationship, which I think is purely friendship or intellectual. Vittoria Colonna was a member of a very important family, the Colonna family, but also Pope, and we've seen the palace of the Colonna. And also she was a highly cultivated woman, which was quite unusual for that age. And the Spirituali had tried to reform the church and kind of get the church more to the core of the gospel rather than keeping the structure, which is the way actually the church didn't went to. The church went quite opposite with the Council of Trento between 1530s and 1564. They actually completely restored the authority of the church. The church became very conservative, the formality of the mass and all that. So let's say that corresponded with the time when Michelangelo was asked first by the Cardinal, the Pope Clement VII, and then by the Pope Paul III, to decorate the Last Judgment, to paint the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel. And this is particularly reflects this kind of protest that Michelangelo had against the church, because the church went a different way. Consider that one of the leaders inside the church of the movement of Reformation, the Spirituali, was the Cardinal, I can't remember his name, Reginald Pole, who was the last Catholic Archbishop of Canterbury, and they tried to assassinate him on the Appian Way. They tried to stab him to death because of that. So basically, it wasn't, and he survived, actually survived. That's why he built a little shrine to commemorate that fact. So it was kind of a brutal fight. And Clement VII Medici had arranged for Michelangelo to come to Rome and to paint the chapel. But when Michelangelo actually made arrangements to move to Rome and come and do this job, the Pope had died. And so the Pope, Paul III Farnese, Alessandro Farnese, was a very cultivated man. He didn't miss the opportunity to have the greatest artist who ever lived, that's what they taught at that time, and you can agree with that somehow, to create the grand masterpiece that is the Last Judgment. Although Michelangelo kind of put a number of elements of his criticism in this kind of vision. We have a number of sketches of the main concern at this time. The main concern that Michelangelo had at this time was how to create these figures, transform them into kind of architecture. If we enter the chapel now, where is the chapel here? You could see that the ceiling and also the walls, they have this painted architecture here, this partiture that divides into different scenes, like a comic book. But for the main altar wall, Michelangelo went completely free. There are some clouds, a deep blue background, but then there's no frames, no nothing. It's all open. Because, of course, it's the end of the world, so there won't be any man-made space then, because we will be just in the presence of God and nothing else. We'll be naked in front of God. So it's all very kind of bare. And this, of course, was a lot more complex because you still have to give, because it's such a large wall, this is 12 meters across, about 36 feet across, and it's like 20 meters tall, so it's about 60 feet tall. It's such a vast space. You have to give the right kind of order, otherwise it would just be confusing, we'd get lost. So that was the main kind of the main kind of concern of Michelangelo. And so this is reflected in the drawings that we have, when he just creates how to all the figures can flow within each other, and then how to create groups and put them kind of in a place that it will work together. Anyway, as we know, when Michelangelo arrived there, the Pope had died, and so he didn't know what was going on. But, and this is the Vasari saying, Michelangelo decided to serve Pope Paul, who ordered him not to change in any way the invention or concept he had been given by Clement. Indeed, the Pope respected Michelangelo's talent and bore him so much love and reverence that he sought only to please him, and it was evident that His Holiness wanted to place his coat of arms under the figure of Jonah in the chapel, where the coat of arms of Pope Julius II had originally been placed. When Michelangelo was asked about it, he did not wish to put it there to avoid doing an injustice to either Julius or Clement, declaring that it was not a good idea, and His Holiness remained satisfied. So it was also, this is just to prove how respected the Michelangelo's ideas were. Michelangelo worked on this in the end for about 7 years. It was finished in the 1541, November the 1st, it was open to the public again. And although the chapel had remained in use while it was doing that fresco. And it took over a year of preparation, not just because of the concept and the drawings. This is the self-portrait of Michelangelo in the chapel. I'll mention that later. But because Michelangelo wanted to completely redo the wall. Now, when he did the ceiling of the chapel, he lost a few months and a lot of probably sleeps because the ceiling had leaks. The wall was not good. The vault was not good. And, you know, it wasn't dry enough. It didn't dry in the time it should have been. So what he did, he personally wanted to had the wall completely redone. He made the wall being completely rebuilt. So basically added another wall on top. This is how the Sistine Chapel looked before Michelangelo had covered this wall. This is the entrance wall. At the bottom, these are the tapestries by Raphael, which at that time were used. This is on the left, there was Saint Moses rescued from the water, and on the right, the Adoration by Ghirlandaio, and then this is by Perugino in the center, the Assumption of Virgin Mary, that we don't have anymore, but this is how it looked like. It's very different, you know, it's Perugino's painting. And Michelangelo, of course, will use the scaffolding this time, and like a traditional scaffolding. And it worked for a total of 7 years, but actually worked there for just over maybe 4 to 5 years. And this really was a huge endeavor. He created at least 300 figures, which is a huge thing. And also there's large figures. You see some of them are twice the size of a real person. So it's really with an incredible level of details. Of course, everything starts from the Caesar's figure of Christ in the center, which it's not the skinny Jesus we're used to see. This is a huge, massive figure. It reminds a lot more of a pagan god rather than of the skinny Jesus we used to see. And next door, there's the Virgin Mary all right up next to him. The arm of Christ gives the whole scene movement. If we see the scene in the complex, everything starts from the bottom left, where you have the resurrection of the flesh, people raising from the dead, and then going up onto the heavens to wait for the judgment, while on the right, people are being saved, and then the ones that are not being saved are going down to hell. Now, I can zoom in because I want to show you here. This is a bit dark. I do have another picture that I could show you, which you can't see. I have to share the whole screen. Sorry again. Yes, I want to share this one now. So this I can probably share better. Can you see this? Yeah. So if we go bottom left, zoom, yes. So here you see people in the shroud and skeletons resurrecting, being turning with the flesh again. There are some figures like this one on the left, according to some, could be Savonarola, which was the preacher, the crazy preacher that actually ruled Florence for 4 years at the end of the 15th century. But there's about 100 figures that various hypotheses that they could be matched with real figures, but we know historical figures Michelangelo knew, but I'm not going to mention them all. And here there are also 2 Moors, 2 Africans, and 2 blacks are saved through the rosary here. You can see the rosary beams. That's because the rosary was used to convert Muslims. Now, at that time, there were slaves which were taken at sea during the wars against the Turks mainly, and then there were church organizations which were converting them to Christianism, and eventually they were also freed of slavery through that. It's like this kind of idea that, of course, a Christian could not enslave another Christian, while if they were a different faith, that didn't matter. Here we have this grand figures, kind of with an incredible level of details. Look how perfect are the muscles here, going up to the heavens, but waiting for the judgment. So that's why here they're all scared. They don't know what's happening. So you could see all these figures here. Look how beautifully they flow. They look at each other. Everything is within that painting is really, really incredible. The others up here, they all don't know what's happening. They're all like they're waiting for the judgment. And then up here we have the cross, held by these angels that had no wings. There's all wingless angels, which was not something just that Michelangelo did. Also Botticelli, it's something related with a Platonic view of that. This is where the coat of arms was hanging. That's just the chain left. And then here the column and the crown of thorns is down here. So that's the three tools of the Passion of Christ. And then the figure of Christ in the center, some other maybe Adam or Adam and Eve should be these two giant figures here. And then another saint or martyr here. Then we have St. Peter and St. Paul. St. Peter giving back the keys, because of course by then the mission of the church would be over. So he's returning the keys, the two keys that symbolize the spiritual and the political power that the follower of Peter had, the Pope had, but the successor of Peter had, the popes, but also the two kind of level of the afterwards, the purgatory and the paradise. And down here we have St. Bartholomew, and that's with a knife. St. Bartholomew has hanging his own skin, because his skin was flayed, but it was alive. And this is the self-portrait of Michelangelo here. We don't know why he placed himself in this particular way, probably because he wanted to, the message was that he was pure as an artist, and so he was a sinner with his flesh and his body, but he didn't believe that whatever his soul felt was wrong. So he was not a sinner with his soul, but only with his body. So that's kind of a Michelangelo protesting probably somehow against the church. Another version, more prosaic, is that this man is the portrait of Pietro Aretino, who actually criticized the fresco, the nudity of the fresco, which became a big problem soon after the painting was revealed. But even while they were making it, he was making it already, people started to criticize, and rumors spread that he created all this massive nudity. There's a detail up here that I never show usually, but it would be appropriate at this time, that you could see that amongst this group, these are people that have been saved, they're going to heaven, so they're all happy and celebrating. But, and there's a figure here with the turbans, but there are, you see, couples kissing. So an older man kissing a younger man, and all this figure kissing here, which is also something that is there, and it represents the joy and the happiness of the saved. There are other figures amongst them. One of the women, I'm not sure if it's this one with the green thing or another one, the green hat, or one other one here. It's believed to be Vittoria Colonna as well. And then as we descend, there are the martyrs, San Biagio with this kind of hairbrush, and then the iron brushes here, Saint Sebastian with the arrows, and Saint Catherine with the wheel with this hooks. She was actually killed, tortured with one of these. Look at the arms of Saint Catherine. She doesn't look like a woman. She's massive man arms, like a bodybuilder's arm. This is another thing of Michelangelo, always exaggerated these bodies, you know, they're all like male bodies basically. There's another figure here which is exactly a man with kind of breasts attached. Here, look at this arm here, how big it is. And this because Michelangelo wanted to create this effect of how the body is really kind of a prison to the soul. It's like a heavy burden, and he kind of achieved that with these massive bodies, which are so fascinating, although sometimes they lack some element of realism. Look at the muscles here. These are the 7 deadly sins, this group here, and I'll just mention you some. This is greed, because it's pulled down by a bag of coin, and the keys, of course, property. There's one with the first in his mouth, gluttony. And then on the right, there is also Lust pulled down by his genitalia down here. There's one to see this pulling down with the arm. And there's also a few others. One element that is really kind of a very interesting theological one, where we were lost now. It's this one here on the right, down here, which is the despair of salvation. It's probably the worst sin, because the devil's pulling him down and he's kind of surrounded by the snake that bites him, and then he's really scared or afraid. This is the desperation. This is the man who thinks that we are destined to sin and there's no salvation. But doesn't matter whatever you do, if you are we are born with the original sin and we are destined to sin. There's no escape. And of course, that is the worst sin, the despair of faith, because the Sistine Chapel, but especially the Last Judgment, is about the idea of sin and forgiveness, and how, you know, this fact that we were created, given the chance to do wonderful things, but also to do horrible things, and how we deal with that. That's the main question that Michelangelo has there, which for him was also, at this point in his life, he was kind of, I think, at the point where he felt very heavily the fact that he was pursued towards, things that the church considered sinful, but he could not accept that as sins, because he knew he was, he had faith and he had good things in him. This is the 7 trumpets of the apocalypse I've described in the book of Revelation, with 2 books, a little one with the ones that are going to heavens, and this ones with the books are going to hell. And that's of course the judgment will come, but as if somehow the names were written. So it's also, this is a bit of a, maybe the influence of Martin Luther with the doctrine of predestination. Then at the right corner, the famous boatman Carun, this green figure, which I think it was one of the nobles from Naples at that time. So again, another figure of contemporary Michelangelo wanted to tease, shipping the souls, the sinners, down to hell. And in here, somebody also sees some of the figures from Dante's Inferno. And here we have Minos at the gate of hell, this figure with the snake around his body, with his donkey ears, which was the judge of the souls. Now, Vasari and also tells us that this man is Biagio da Cesena. And let me see if I can find it. I have a way. Now, to return to the scene, Michelangelo had already completed more than 3/4 of the work when Pope Paul came to see it, and when Messer Biagio da Cesena, master of ceremonies and a scrupulous man who was in the chapel with the Pope, was asked what they thought of the painting. He declared that it was a most unseemly thing in such a venerable place to have painted so many nudes that so indecently displayed their shame, and that it was not a work of a Pope's chapel, but rather one for baths or taverns. This comment displeased Michelangelo, and wishing to avenge himself, as soon as Messer Biagio had left, he drew his actual portrait without his being present, placing him in hell in the person of Minos, which is this one on the right corner, with a large serpent wrapped around his legs in a heap of devils. Nor did Messer Biagio's entreaties to the Pope and Michelangelo that it removed and to Michelangelo that it to be removed do any good, for Michelangelo left it there in memory of the event, when it can still be seen today. So the Biagio then asked the Pope to kind of cover and removed it. Of course, Michelangelo refused. Let me go back to the presentation there. Google Chrome, yes. So let me just go back to the presentation where it was. So Michelangelo was surely one not to be messed with. Just a few more details. The figure of the Christ of the Last Judgment, it's inspired, at least the head, the hairstyle, the face, from a famous statue still today in the Vatican Museum, and was there in the 1500s. It's been there since the 1400s, the Apollo del Belvedere, which has been currently under restoration, but I believe the restoration might be over by now. And it really a divine expression of this statue, which is by a Greek artist, Leocates of the 5th century BC. And Michelangelo really was able to re-elaborate this classical art and to incorporate it into something new. This is the detail of the rosary beads with the Africans being saved by the rosary. That is the figure that we saw before. And that is the resurrection of the soul. These pictures have a better quality, but this is the Pietro Aretino, the man who actually had criticized Michelangelo for the nudes. And you can see the angels even are nude. Now, some of this were covered after the end of the Council of Trento. The Pope had asked Michelangelo to cover the nudity, and Michelangelo refused. Actually, that was in the official documents of the Council of Trento, the Catholic Reformation. Michelangelo refused because he said, I'm 87, I'm not going to go up on the scaffolding anymore. And then the church has bigger problems than a bit of color on the wall to fix. So you should better fix other things that you have. So one of his pupils, Daniele da Volterra, was in charge of, he put about 15 covers, but later on in the years more were added. I believe a total of 40 were covered. Some of them have been removed in the last restoration, and most of them have been left. And that has been a bit controversial because they said, oh, you should remove them all. In some cases it was not possible because the damage was too big. In some others they didn't really want it to, because still seeing all the nudity in, not just in the for example, for the devils, they're almost all nude, but the others figures maybe would have been too prominent. This is Karun, the boatman, the one that you pay a token. Again, the soul's going up. It's beautiful also how three-dimensional they are, the figures. And this is Biagio da Cesena, minus here. Actually, the portrait is extremely accurate. It was actually, they could recognize him with the donkey ears and the snake biting him and all that kind of stuff. So that this was shown to the public. He was really mad at Michelangelo for what he had done. We know how it looked before it was repainted, because there's a copy made in the mid-1500s. And so this is currently in Capodimonte. I think this is Domenico Beccafumi, if I'm not mistaken. And you could see actually all the saints nude, Adam nude, all St. Peter. And so that they said, no, this is too much, we can't have this. And so Michelangelo, Daniele Volterra, actually, Michelangelo knew it was going to cover them, and it was done about the time Michelangelo was about to die anyway. There was a detail here. This is St. Sebastian with St. Catherine, San Biagio. This actually had to be repainted because the figures actually, they looked too much for them. And this is how the Sistine Chapel looks today. This is actually when they hang the tapestries on the sides. Okay, so the chapel was finished by 1541. Michelangelo will die in 1564. The last 20 years of his life, Michelangelo was very busy, especially as an architect and urbanist, and as a I'm just looking around if I forgot any of my books I wanted to show. And it really became an extremely influential figure in the not just in Roman art, but for the art of the late Renaissance and the Manneristic period. So that's what we will see next time. We also will see how influential it was regarding the there it is, how influential it was for the generation of painters after him. So Vasari and Rosso Fiorentino and many others. So this is very, very important. I don't know if you have any questions. I do have a last, as I promised last time. Last week I did watch The Sin, this movie by Andrei Konchalovsky. And this actor, actually, he looks a lot like, what's the actor that does Wolverine, the Australian actor? How's he called? The one that does the X-Men. Can't remember, but it's actually, this is Testoni. He's an Italian artist. It's an Italian actor. He actually only became an actor in his 30s or 40s. I think it was a dentist, a trained dentist, and then he became an actor only in his 30s or 40s, and he's 60 now, and he played Pasolini in a movie about Pasolini because he actually looks like him a lot. And I'm going to show you now, as a kind of a last video of this talk, the movie ending, where there's Michelangelo in the quarry, just sitting as a vision of Dante Alighieri, I think. And then he sits there, and he's very pleased with this. He has understood the meaning of art at some point. And then he's kind of laughing, and there's music and there's images of some of his artwork. The movie is really nice. It's only a short period of time. It's the period when Michelangelo, it's caught in the fire between the Della Rovere and Pope Leo X, the Medici, and there's episodes around there. And the quarry, he changed from Carrara marble to the Cave of Seravezza. So it's very interesting. It's only a very short time of Michelangelo's life, but it's done very well. It's very realistic in the way of the environment and the quarry, the marble quarries. But there's a number of mistakes which I would have avoided, but like kind of historical kind of inaccuracies and things. But it's kind of pleasant to watch. It has kind of a slow pace. It's in that sense.
Alberto Testone, Mario.
Alberto Testone. It's quite slow.
I disagree with your evaluation of Sin. It's bad movie.
It's sorry, bad movie.
It's a bad movie.
I mean, it's a bit boring at times, but I appreciated the fact that it's very realistic in the way of the setting. That's something. I can't remember.
The finale with this model?
That's the finale here. Okay, so I'll see you next Sunday for the last episode. Thank you very much for joining me, and now we enjoy the finale of Sin, the Konchalovsky movie. I'm sorry, just need to reshare because, yes, share sound. Here we go.
We cannot hear you.
Sorry, this is Michelangelo with the model of the Basilica of St. Peter, which we'll see next time. So
Why?
thank you very much, everybody, for joining, and I'll see you next Sunday. Buonanotte.
Buonanotte, Mario. Grazie.
Buonanotte, thank you. Ciao, buonanotte.